What's up, guys? Today is a very exciting day because it is the first episode of a brand new show that is coming to you from the Guilty as Charged feed, featuring me, Alex Katson, from Chargers Wire. You may know me from over there or from my work in the spring doing draft stuff for Guilty as Charged. And you guys liked that well enough that they have invited me back. I've been upgraded to a recurring character, and so I'll be here every week to talk about the week that was in college football and who the Chargers might have their eye on for this upcoming draft, and previewing a little bit of the week to come, and talking about guys that they might be watching this week. This week is a little bit different. This is coming to you on Wednesday with the short week because of the holiday and just getting our feet wet with this new schedule and everything. But normally we will be here every Tuesday talking college football as part of Guilty as Charged massive schedule this year. 7 days of content every single week. So make sure that you are subscribed to the channel if you are not already. Get that promo in there. Also, make sure that if you like all this stuff, you find me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is at Alex Katson, spelled the same way you see on the screen. I am over there posting about prospects, posting about the Chargers, posting about all sorts of stuff all the time. And so if you need more than this one video a week, that is the place to find me. Um, So, this week is going to be a little bit different because it's still super early in the season. And so we're going to talk about a lot of guys really quickly. As we get deeper into the season, we'll go kind of more in depth on guys that have kind of broken out, made a name for themselves, are going to be big players in the draft. We know are going to be in the draft. We know, et cetera, et cetera. But this week we're just going to kind of do a quick overview because the Chargers did go on a ton of scouting visits this week. Um, Week one is usually a big time for those scouting visits, especially because it's a lot of non-conference games. You get a lot of games between teams that uh, you are interested in both sides as an NFL team evaluating. There's only so much that you can glean from conference play, and that's not to say that like conference play is useless, right? But you like if you're scouting the Pac-12, you can only scout Utah play so many different teams versus like last week Utah played Florida, and so you get two for the price of one in that sort of sense. You get to watch the guys from Florida as well. So week one is always a popular week for scouting visits. Something to keep in mind is this early in the season. It may seem super early in the season to be talking about the draft and doing all this stuff for us, but for the scouts in that building, most of the evaluations are already done. Most of the evaluations are done over the summer, and there's just adjustments that they make as the season plays out, and they make some tweaks here and there. And obviously, there are guys that rise up the board during the season. There are guys that fall off the board. As guys declare or decide to go back to school, that changes things. But for the most part, the on-field evaluation is done. They do all that stuff over the spring, over the summer. That's what those scouts get paid to do. Um, and so really these visits are about how does a player handle the environment of a big game or something? Or, like if they're going and visiting practice, like how does that player participate in practice? How does he interact with the rest of his teammates? Is he a leader in the locker room? All that sort of like cliche stuff that you hear about. Um, because all that stuff does ultimately matter a lot to NFL teams when they're thinking about who they're going to draft. It's not just about on-field performance. And so there is a lot of that that goes into it as well. That's what a lot of these visits are for, like I said. And so, there may be some visits on this list that you're kind of like, why would they go to that game? That doesn't seem like a place that they need to be going. And it's like, well, it's leave no stone unturned and all of that. But we have the list of everywhere that the Chargers were this past weekend. The formatting got a little bit screwed up here, but so Charter Scouts were at 7 different games this weekend. Credit to Bolt's Draft Talk on Twitter, who compiled this list. He they, sorry, do great stuff over there. And we tend to be very aligned on the way that we feel about prospects. So if you like my opinions, you will probably like theirs also. But they put together this great list of everywhere that the Chargers were this past week. So they were at that Utah-Florida game, like we mentioned at the top. They went and saw BYU play Sam Houston State, North Carolina State play UConn, Penn State West Virginia in a big rivalry game, Texas Tech Wyoming in that double overtime game that Wyoming ended up pulling out, UCF Kent State, and then that North Carolina South Carolina, another big rivalry game. And so again, kind of like I was talking about, like you're looking at like how do these guys perform in these big moments? You know, how do these guys show up for these rivalry games, these games that are, you know, prime time national TV, all the lights, sold out stadium, you know, 100,000 people screaming and yelling. Because that's what the NFL is every weekend, right? And so, you know, you got to know how those guys are going to respond. The Chargers also went to practice at BYU and James Madison this week. So double dipped at BYU. They were at practice earlier in the week and then went to that BYU Sam Houston State game and then went to practice at James Madison. And then that scout probably went on to that West Virginia game or that South Carolina game, depending on what their exact region breakdown looks like. It's a little bit different for every team, so it's hard to say for sure. So, the way this is going to work, we're going to go through each and every single one of these games that the Charger Scouts attended last week, and we're going to talk about between 2 and 4 prospects that I think might be on their radar from one or both sides of that game, just to kind of get you guys an overview of some guys to be thinking about. You know, obviously, the draft is a long ways away, 7 months away, but it's never too early to start thinking about some guys and, you know, developing some. Opinions about some guys that might be a little bit further down the board. And then, you know, when it gets to the spring and everything, and, you know, there's a guy that the Chargers meet with at one of these all-star events or at the combine or they go to their pro day or something, you can look back on this video from September and be like, hey, I remember that guy. Why do I remember that guy? Oh, we talked about him in September because the Chargers went and saw him play Texas Tech or whatever, right? So that is going to be how it works this week. As the weeks go on, I don't anticipate that the Chargers are going to be at 7 games every weekend. This weekend is a little bit unique because it got stretched out over the long holiday weekend as well. Um, and the Chargers have a relatively small scouting department. I don't think that they're going to be at 7 games every week. So this part will probably get a little bit shorter, or it will stay the same length, but we'll talk about guys more in depth, especially as the season goes on, like I mentioned before. Um, so, talking about Utah, Florida, the 4 prospects that I find most interesting from a Chargers perspective in that game. Obviously, we're not going to talk about every single prospect in every single game because for games like Utah and Florida, there's 20 guys you could talk about, right? We can talk about Cameron Rising, who didn't play in this game. We could talk about Brent Keithley, who didn't play in this game. We could talk about, you know, uh, 800 guys for Florida because they're an SEC team. We can talk about 800 guys for Utah because they're a Pac-12 team that has generated a ton of NFL talent. We're just going to focus on a couple. If there's a guy on here that you think is a good Chargers fit and he's not on here, it's probably because like we're just going to save him for an episode later in the season. We're going to be here every week doing this stuff. Like we got plenty of time. Don't worry about it. But the 2 guys for Utah that I think are most interesting from a Chargers perspective, at least from this game, that played in this game, are tight end Thomas Yasmin and safety Cole Bishop. So Yasmin is an Australian that started in football, actually playing rugby over in Australia. Came over to Utah. He's been more of a blocking tight end, kind of a backup type role. Excuse me. Um, Past couple years kind of stuck behind Keefe and also Dalton Kincaid, who's on the Bills now, of course. And so with both of those guys out, he kind of, you know, had a little bit more of an opportunity to shine against Florida. Ended up only with 3 catches for 15 yards. You know, not anything crazy. Not like the stat lines we're used to seeing from Kincaid last season on that Utah team. But Yasmin is primarily a blocking tight end. And so that's not something to be overly concerned about. In fact, it's probably something to be a little bit excited about if you're a Chargers fan, because if you've been paying any attention to the tight end room, there's no blocking in it. And so, getting a guy who might be able to do that, even if he doesn't add as much in the receiving game, is definitely not a bad thing at all. Um, Bishop is a big hitting run support, like your prototypical, like strong safety type player. And maybe that's a little bit redundant with like the way that Derwin James operates in the Chargers defense, but also think about how much the Chargers move Derwin James around. There's a lot of questions at safety still, like Alohi Gilman is going to be taking a big step up into a starting role this season. JT Woods has looked super, super, super improved this training camp and preseason and everything, but like we're still waiting for him to put it together in regular season games. And so like Bishop is someone that I think is battling for that top safety spot in this year's draft as of right now. There's a couple other guys, Andrew Makuba from Clemson, a lot of people like. There's a couple other guys kind of spread around, and there's a guy in Maryland, Bo Brady. A few different guys, but Bishop is definitely in the mix for me. Just a super, super big hitter. Has really good instincts in run defense. Had that hit that forced the fumble on Graham Mertz really early on in this game. Um, Unfortunately, did miss a pretty decent chunk of the game due to an injury, but I think he performed well enough when he was out there on the field that he's someone worth keeping an eye on. Moving to the Florida side of things, first guy we have is corner Jason Marshall Jr. Um, Marshall is a junior, both in name and also in class status. He's in his third year at Florida. He's someone that a lot of people like as a potential first rounder. He was a big time recruit coming out of high school, and has kind of waited his turn at Florida. Florida's always got the corners, direct to the NFL pipeline, and so a lot of times you got to wait your turn over there, and he's the next in line. He did get beat a couple times in that Utah game, but it's early and there's still plenty of time to recover, and a lot of times NFL teams are looking at body of work, right? And so it's like, okay, yeah, you got burned in this one game, right? But like, how do you come back and respond over the course of the rest of the season? Do you come back and you bounce back really strongly next week with a good performance? Do you carry that performance on through the rest of the season? Like, how are you going to respond to that sort of thing? And so I think that's an interesting thing to keep an eye on with Marshall. um, Especially because I don't think that DB is something that you can rule out for the Chargers super early on in the draft this year. With corner, right? Like we still don't know what JC Jackson's injury uh, return is going to look like. Michael Davis is on an expiring contract. Asante Samuel is kind of getting moved around here and there. Like there's a lot of question marks in that secondary still, and so DB is a position that they could target pretty early on, and so I think Marshall is someone to keep an eye on. And then also running back Montreal Johnson Jr. He's kind of the Thunder to Trevor Etienne's Lightning. Etienne, who is Travis's brother, Travis Etienne of the Jaguars, his younger brother, is kind of the big play threat for the Gators. Not draft eligible. He's a true sophomore this year. Although worth pointing out also that NFL scouts are always scouting for a year or two ahead. They're not always just scouting for this year, and so there is an aspect of it that is looking at him as well. But Johnson is kind of more of a prototypical like bruising running back, more of a downhill runner. I think he'll be kind of more of like a mid to late rounder. Someone to keep an eye on is kind of like a fourth, fifth, like day 3 pick at running back, especially with Austin Eckler and Joshua Kelly's contracts coming up this season. We know how much Tom Telesco loves drafting running backs and on day 3. Moving on to that BYU game. Again, the Chargers were at BYU practice as well. Two guys that stand out to me here are running back Aiden Robbins, who kind of similar to Johnson, a big, big dude. He's 240 pounds, real bruising downhill running back. Not really as much of a threat as a pass catcher. He's on to his third school this year. He started out at Louisville and then transferred to UNLV. Now he's at BYU. He's kind of the main guy at BYU this season. And then tight end Isaac Rex, who's been a guy that's been on my radar for a couple years now. Really like his game, more of like an all-around tight end. Had a really, really big receiving year in 2020 with Zach Wilson there. 2021 was more of a blocking showcase season. 2022, you got kind of a little bit of both. And so now, like, you're hoping to get a little bit of both again and show some improvement this season. I think that he's someone that could be available in the mid rounds as a tight end option for the Chargers to upgrade. North Carolina State at UConn. So UConn has a couple guys that I think are going to be late round UDFA type guys. So they've got a guard, Christian Haynes, who is on both the Shrine Bowl and the Senior Bowl watch lists. Um, would mostly just be like a depth piece. He's a little bit light, like just barely over 300 pounds. But for the Chargers, the way that they've run their scheme in the preseason, at least, it seems like there's a lot more pulling being asked of the guards and everything. You need a lot more athletic guys that can move in space. And so that's where Haynes kind of comes in as someone to keep an eye on, as like really, really light mover at only like 305 pounds. Not the strongest guy in the world because of it, but really great mover in space. I think he's a great puller, someone to keep an eye on just like as a depth piece. And then UConn linebacker Jackson Mitchell, just a tackling machine, had like, somewhere between like 100 and 150 tackles last season. One of those guys that just like has a nose for the ball, is always around. He's going to be a late rounder. His measurables are a little bit weird. He's a little bit small, but just someone that racks up tackles. He's going to be a big time special teams player. Wouldn't be surprised to see him sneak into the late rounds of the draft, but I think he'll be, kind of that 6'7" UDFA type guy who ends up making a big dent on special teams. That's the kind of linebacker that the Chargers seem to go after pretty frequently, and so I think that's someone to keep an eye on as well. North Carolina State wise, they've got a corner, Shaheem Battle. He got UDFA grades over the summer from the scouting service Blesto. So there's two scouting services in the NFL. There's Blesto and there's National Scouting. Basically, half the league belongs to Blesto, half the league belongs to National Scouting. Each team has a scout that's assigned to one of those two services, and they do spring grades and everything and disseminate them out to the schools, or not to the schools, sorry, to the NFL teams. And one of them, I can't remember which one, I think it's National Scouting, are also the service that picks the guys for the combine. So, carries a lot of weight. Battle did have some UDFA grades over the summer. He's on the Shrine Bowl and the Senior Bowl watch list. Kind of a versatile dude. North Carolina State has moved him around a little bit. The Chargers just took his old teammate, Tyler Baker Williams, as a UDFA defensive back this season. He ended up, not making it through training camp and final cuts and everything, didn't get re-signed back to the practice squad, but a little bit of a connection there of someone that I might have been keeping an eye on for, a little bit longer than just this week. And then also tight end Trent Penix. He's kind of a tight end, he's kind of a fullback, he's kind of a wide receiver, he's kind of a H-back. Most similar to like a Steven Anderson type role. Mostly a blocking guy. He's going to have a lot more receiving opportunities this season because North Carolina State is transitioning to an air raid. So, how that works is something to keep an eye on, just, something to see. But he's going to be more of an H-back guy, blocker, special teams player, that sort of thing. So lots of special teams in this one. Penn State, West Virginia. We got a couple more tight ends to talk about. Cole Taylor at West Virginia is a big time receiving threat. Started out at LSU and was kind of their receiving tight end until Mason Taylor, no relation as far as I'm aware, kind of took over that role from him. Transfers to West Virginia. When he transferred, he made Neil Brown, the coach of West Virginia, promise that he was going to have a role in the receiving game. And then as soon as he got to West Virginia, he was like, oh, well, actually, like, in order to be a successful tight end, you also need to be able to block. And so he's focused a lot on improving as a blocker since he got to West Virginia at the beginning of last season. I think he's adequate in that area. I think he's still a better receiving tight end, but still someone to keep an eye on as kind of like someone that's coming into their own as a more well-rounded tight end. Penn State edge, Adisa Isaac, just a freak athlete. He got third round grades over the summer, somewhere in there. He's kind of more tools than polished football player at this point. Think kind of a Boye Mafe type player who's with the Seahawks now. If you remember him coming out of Minnesota a couple years ago, kind of a similar type player, just like super, super like measurables at the wazoo, like super freaky athlete, just like needs to put it together as a football player. And then tight end Tyler Warren from Penn State, kind of latest in that long line of Penn State tight ends that have come out the last couple years. Um, More of an all-around guy. He's kind of replacing that role that Brenton Strange played last year. Strange is with the Jaguars now. Um, I thought about putting Theo Johnson on here. He did not play in this game, and then I was looking into why he wasn't playing in this game, and it turns out that he got arrested for, I think it was an assault charge of something of some sort, back in the spring-ish, and so he will not be on the Chargers board. The Chargers don't take players that have gotten in any sort of legal trouble ever, and so he's a good player. He's someone worth keeping an eye on if you're just kind of generally interested in the draft, but he's not going to be a Charger, so he's not on here. Texas Tech, Wyoming, that great game that hopefully you guys got to see on Saturday. Texas Tech has two guys on Bruce Feldman's freaks list, defensive tackle Jalen Hutchings and edge Miles Cole. Both of those dudes just super, super great athletes. Hutchings I think is a little bit better as a football player, kind of a 3-5 technique, can kind of move around the formation. Really like his upside as a pass rushing guy from the interior. Cole is a guy that transferred in from Louisiana Monroe, and has really not slowed down very much with that step up in competition, which is always something that you like to see from someone coming from a Group of Five conference transferring up to the Power Five and the Big 12. So he's someone to keep an eye on this season as well. And then Wyoming linebacker Easton Gibbs, kind of similar to Jackson Mitchell we were talking about earlier, just a tackling machine. He got sixth round grades this summer, so he's a little bit more prototypically sized, which kind of makes that difference between him and Mitchell, who got more like UDFA grades. He's going to be another like special teams type guy. Also worth pointing out that Austin Eckler's brother Wyatt is a linebacker on this Wyoming team as well. So there's always a chance that the Chargers are out there keeping an eye on him on their connection business. UCF and Kent State. This one's a little bit leaner. UCF doesn't really have like a ton of guys that I think are super interesting Chargers wise. It's a lot of like there's a quarterback that they have, John Reese Plumlee, who's not really an NFL player in my opinion. They got some guys in the trenches and stuff. But I think the most intriguing is probably going to be running back RJ Harvey. More of that kind of like dual threat running back that you think of like in the modern NFL. Had 84 yards rushing, 50 yards receiving, a touchdown in both areas against Kent State this weekend. So if you're looking for someone like kind of on the cheap to replace Austin Eckler, if things don't get that relationship doesn't get mended before the end of the season, so I'm going to keep an eye on in the later rounds or like as a UDFA, same way that Eckler started. So always got to keep an eye out for those guys. And then Kent State linebacker Devin Nicholson, he's a Mizzou transfer, and had 11 solo tackles, 13 total tackles in that Kent State UCF game. And so that's always something that you like to see from a guy transferring down from the Power Five to the Group of Five, is that like he's just racking up stats. Someone who is probably going to be more of a box score guy than like a real like draft darling, but another guy to keep an eye on is just like a productive player. Will probably get a shot as a UDFA at some point. In that North Carolina, South Carolina game, we got a little bit more intrigue. Obviously, you got guys like Drake May, Spencer Rattler, players like that. Not players that the Chargers are going to be super interested in, so I left them out. But Cedric Gray is someone who I think is a little bit underrated right now. Obviously, it's September. There's a long time to go, but he's a guy that got second, third round grades from one of these scouting services this summer. Really good feel. Just in all areas of the game, really good run defender, has like that quick trigger that you like from a linebacker coming downhill. He is a little bit iffy getting off of blocks from time to time, and so you want to give him kind of free lanes most of the time, especially as a pass rusher. You want to give him kind of like that free lane to blitz, like you think about the way the Chargers have used Drew Tranquil before he left for Kansas City, kind of that same sort of vein. South Carolina's got a defensive tackle, Tonka Hemingway. His name, you'd think that he's like a nose tackle, like big honking dude. Not really. He's like a three tech, maybe a five tech, more of like a pass rushing D tackle. Someone that Jim Nagy, the director of the Senior Bowl, identified as a sleeper back in July, just because like the league is transitioning more towards these athletic defensive tackles that can rush the pass on third down. Hemingway is that sort of player, and his name's Tonka. He's fun. He's a cool guy to talk about. And then North Carolina's got a tight end, Bryson Nesbitt. We're going heavy on the tight ends this week. Nesbitt is more of a receiving tight end, more of like a seam ripper type guy. He's an okay blocker. I don't love him in that area, but he's really more of just like a guy up the seam that you can, throw the ball out to and have him make some guys miss in space. So someone to keep an eye on, especially with that tight end room maybe getting like completely remodeled next season. Chargers were at James Madison practice, like we talked about at the top. The guy that I think that they were probably there for is right tackle Nick Kidwell. He's on both the Shrine Bowl and the Senior Bowl watch list this season. He's a sixth-year senior. He's been James Madison's starting right tackle forever, basically. He's not going to be someone that like really gets onto draft radars. I don't think going to be someone that's like a UDFA signing, comes in and is probably like a practice squad guy for a year or two. Um, but I think that that's probably what they're there for. There are some other guys on that James Madison team. It might just be a thing about like establishing relationships for younger guys that are going to be in the draft a year or two from now. Like that's always something that NFL scouts are thinking about as well. And so like it's not necessarily for someone this year, but if it is, it's probably for Kidwell. Kind of think like a Nick Millsap type player, where it's just like guy that played in college forever, was a pretty solid starter at like a lower level, come in, see if he can develop into anything. Um, yeah. So that's it for last week. So looking ahead to next week, I tried to pick one game from every time slot to kind of focus in on some matchups of some draft eligible guys for you guys at home to watch for. So in the early slate, we got that Nebraska Colorado game. Obviously, Colorado coming off that huge upset of TCU. They're up into the AP poll this week. Going to try to continue that momentum against Nebraska. Nebraska's got a corner that I like a decent bit. His name is Quentin Newsome. Pretty solid outside corner. He's going to have his hands full with Xavier Weaver, Travis Hunter, Joe Horn. I put Xavier Weaver down because he's a senior. He's on the watch lists. He's the most draft eligible of the Colorado receivers. Obviously, Newsome is probably going to spend a lot of time on Travis Hunter as well, but Travis Hunter is a sophomore, and so he's not eligible until next year. So, not really someone that we're going to focus on a ton this season, unfortunately. Mississippi Tulane is in that 12:30 window. Tulane's got an LSU transfer at left tackle, Cameron Wire, who got some UDFA grades over the summer. Um, Decent player, transferred down from LSU to Tulane for a reason, but is a solid player for that level of competition. He's going to go back to his SEC roots and be going up against Kari Coleman and Cedric Johnson from Mississippi, who I think are both draftable edge pieces. If you're looking for edge depth, especially with the Khalil Mack and the Joey Bosa situations, like you're looking for someone to beef out that edge rotation with Chris Rumph and Thule, and whichever one of Bosa or Mack stay. If one of them stays, then like that's a good place to start looking with a pretty decent matchup on Saturday. 4 o'clock window, we got Texas, Alabama, obviously a huge game. Alabama's number 3 and Texas is number 11, I think. And so, plenty of reasons to watch, even just like from a college football intrigue perspective. But Jatavion Sanders is one of the best tight ends in this draft. Again, more of a receiving threat. Not necessarily a huge blocker, but he's going to probably match up mostly with Malachi Moore, who's kind of Alabama's like safety nickel sort of guy. Has really like bounced around, has had a roller coaster of a career at Alabama. At one point was thought of as like a super like bona fide first round draft pick, kind of got benched for Brian Branch last season. Now like is back in the starting lineup, it's kind of like back and forth. Not really in that conversation for that top safety spot in the draft, but with a good performance against Sanders this weekend, like anything is really possible. And then in the late window at 7 p.m. Pacific, we've got Auburn versus Cal. Auburn's got two corners that had Senior Bowl invites last year and then decided to go back to school for their COVID eligibility season. DJ James and Nehemiah Pritchett. One or both of them is actually from Mobile, Alabama, which is where the Senior Bowl is. So that always kind of plays into those invites as well. But both of them are eminently draftable players. They're both probably top five corners in this draft. Really good place to start if you're looking for, potential Chargers in terms of like DB picks in the first like 2 days of the draft. Just go and watch Auburn tape, figure out which one of James or Pritchett you like better, start from there. um, they're gonna have a NFL receiver to guard against Cal, which is kind of a interesting thing that we get to say about Cal. It's not necessarily always true in the last couple of years, but Jeremiah Hunter's a really good player. He's gonna have a hard time because no matter which side of the field he's on, he's gonna be facing an NFL corner. So, also interested to see how that goes for him. Um, but yeah, two NFL corners, an NFL receiver, plenty of reasons to watch that game. You don't need to watch USC Stanford. Watch this instead, please. um, that is it for this week. I hope you guys enjoyed. We went a little bit long, probably. We'll probably try to cut that runtime down a little bit in the following weeks. Like I said, though, this week's a little bit busier because the Chargers were on a ton of scouting visits this week, and I wanted to give you guys a couple of players to keep an eye out for with all of those visits going on. We will be back next week on Tuesday to talk about that week coming up of college football, that Auburn Cal game, Nebraska Colorado, all the games in between. Talk about some guys that stood out. Talk about some guys that maybe didn't stand out so much, and we'll be back to preview the next week as well. Again, we will be here every Tuesday. This week is a little bit weird, but starting next week, every Tuesday, talking about college football, talking about the draft. Super excited to get this series rolling, and I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you guys continue to enjoy, and hope you get something out of it. We will see you. I will see you next week. The channel will see you tomorrow, today, every day. We'll be here every day. Yeah, stick around. See you guys.